In this episode, I will share my Empire Strikes Back season highlights and also cover minutes 121 through 125. Hello there, and welcome to Star Wars Music Minute, where we celebrate the music and sound of Star Wars 5 cinematic minutes at a time. I'm Chrysanthe Tan, you can call me Xanthe, and today is the season highlights episode for The Empire Strikes Back. Specifically, I have made a list of 30 takeaways, trends, and highlights from this season. But note, this is not the final episode of this season, because next week will be an interview with mastering engineer Chris Malone. I've been leading up to it this all season, and that will be a nice cap because we'll only have the credits to talk about next week, and we'll talk all about the soundtrack hullabaloo, and we'll talk all about recording the Star Wars saga, etc. So I'm doing the recap, the highlights episode, one episode early, so don't stop listening after this episode. Anyway, before jumping right into the list of 30 things, I'm going to quickly cover minutes 121 through 125 because they take us from the final scene and transition us into the end credits about a minute and a half in. And it's probably one of the most loved end credits transitions. So I'm excited to hear that. And then finally, I will end with some listener questions and requests, including questions. I got many questions over the course of the season about how I arranged the Asteroid Field cover that you've been hearing all season. But yes, I have lots to cover, and I will try to be as concise as possible. All right. Without further ado, let's just jump in to minutes 121 through 125. All right, I'm going to start playing them. Note that the very first sound you're going to hear is a ship taking off, so it's going to be a little bit loud. So it starts with the Force theme.
Luke, we're ready for takeoff.
Lando is in the cockpit of the Falcon.
Jabba the Hutt and that bounty hunter. We'll contact you.
I'll meet you at the rendezvous point on Tatooine.
Princess.
I think it's funny how he hesitates before he says Tatooine, as if he's not sure how to pronounce that, and then just kind of says it. I don't know if that's actually what happened, but I don't know if we ever hear him say Tatooine like that ever again, but don't quote me on that. The Force theme is, I mean, at this point in time, I won't say it's a common way to end the films because it's not, not up until this point, because in the previous film, A New Hope, we ended with the medal ceremony music going into the credits. But I would say since Empire, there's definitely more, we have seen many more films in the Star Wars universe that do end with a Force theme instance. And so, yeah, even though it doesn't technically end with just the Force theme, because it does go into Han and Leia's theme in a second, I do think it's interesting that this is the moment where, since that happens first, I don't know. I'm just saying this is the trendsetter right here. Okay, let's continue listening.
We'll find Han. I promise.
Chewie, I'll be waiting for your signal. Take care, you two.
May the Force be with you.
You can hear the horn players. I don't know how many there are actually. You can hear the shift. I don't know what it's called. Like on strings, it would be called like shifting if you're shifting from one position to another. But you can hear like the leap between a couple of those notes. And again, it could also be an edit. I don't know.
May the Force be with you.
Okay. I'm specifically thinking dee 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 dee, and then dee, and then coming down dee. You can hear a tiny bit of like an onset.
Here, you two.
May the Force.
Sorry, I'm gonna go back a little more.
Bounty hunter. We'll contact you.
I'll meet you at the rendezvous point on Tatooine.
Princess, we'll find Han. I promise.
Chewie, I'll be waiting for your signal.
There.
Take care, you two.
I'm not saying it's bad. I just pointing it out. you'll note that we have the strings doing the very typical Force theme accompaniment. And the horns are really carrying the melody here. I would say this is a classic rendition of it. So, sound editing wise, we are hearing Chewie's groan. Let me see if I can put a picture up on screen. So we are hearing, so Chewie is not with Luke and Leia. Chewie, like explaining the film to everyone who listening who knows this already. So Chewie goes off with Lando in the Falcon. And when we hear his moan, we hear it first from the perspective of the Falcon. So we are with Chewie when he moans. And then we hear it from the perspective of like Luke and Leia hearing it from the comm. And Leia's face at that point, she does that little smile, and I feel like it's in direct, like this face that she makes. I put an image up on screen. I think it's like when she hears Chewie's moan, but we can hear the sound change from live sound. I mean, like in the rooms, in the cockpit sound to filtered through the comm sound. I love the way that the Force theme is expanding here because, I mean, you can hear it in the sound. You can hear the sound of the mechanical hand moving. And again, I'll put an image up on screen. And the Force theme there, it continues, but it also gets like, it gets playful, right? You hear it in the pizzicato as Luke is testing out his hand and he kind of, is like smiling. It sounds more hopeful. The tempo, literally, the tempo increases. So let's hear that. Right. So there's that like interstitial material where it's not technically the Force theme, but then it spins back out into the Force theme again, but this time on the upper woodwinds, and the effect is, in my opinion, less stately and less somber, perhaps, than it was on the French horns. It sounds like it's being like, there's a sense of elevation to it, at least from what I am hearing. So let's go back and hear that. Actually, let's get into it. It's just so nice. Right? So instead of going dee, what does it do? So instead of going, it goes like it doesn't go back down, it just keeps rising. And then higher. So it just went up, like on a staircase, it just went up 3 steps. And I'm not talking about musical steps, technically. And now we're transitioning to Han and Leia. As Luke puts his arm around Leia, and they look out at this beautiful view. Sorry to pause it in the middle of that. I just don't want to get an annoying copyright situation. So I'm going to put on screen what they are looking at. Yes, it's quite beautiful. It's framed in a way that I feel. No, that's a little bit mean to say. So what they're looking at right now, I feel like, like the Disney Star Cruiser Hotel. Well, I'm going there anyway. You know how they have like, so it's this hotel where you're supposed to pretend like you're on this, you're on a ship, you're on like a, spaceship. And so the windows, like it's like all in their market. I haven't been there. It's very expensive, but like in their marketing materials, you can see the windows, they make it look like you're staring out into space and stuff. So there are like bridges, or there's like a bridge where you can all look out at the space, and I think there's maybe a battle or something. But anyway, yeah, that's the shot. That's the shot where everyone, myself included, dream about being able to experience. I have to say, like, this is one of my favorite Han and Leia outfit moments. I just feel like they're so sibling twinning right here. Obviously, we don't know that they're siblings yet, but this, like Luke's tan-colored duster and tan pants, I like this look a lot. And Leia's white outfit with the hood, like it a lot. Okay, so we'll continue playing. I have visible chills. I've gotten overwhelmed many times this season and had to almost like stop listening to things. This is one of those moments where I feel like the music, this is going to sound very cheesy, lifts you, lifts me at least. Directed by Irvin Kershner. That was really rude of me to stop at the best part where it crests into the credits. Let's do that transition again. Oh my God, it is so good. Okay. So the story of the track that we are hearing, it has gone through, there have been several different versions of it, which this is something that I learned from Chris Malone, who is the guest next week. This track, you can find it called the Rebel Fleet / End Title, and we will talk more about the end title track as a whole next week. However, we will keep listening right now because so I can point out, some of the themes that are going, and we can hear some bit of the order of the themes. But yeah, I'm just letting you know that we will continue to talk about this next week. All right. So we start with. All right. I'm failing at this. I keep not stopping, not going far enough back. Okay. You can hear that ship flying from the right side. The strings lead us to the end. Okay. So as usual, I'll maybe narrate through this a little bit. As usual, we are starting off the end credits with the Star Wars main theme, A section. Into the Rebel fanfare. Now this thing is descending heroic tetrachords. And the string stuff, And we're going to go into Yoda's theme gets the first billing in the credits. I don't know if billing is the And it's a very brisk, it's the briskest version of Yoda's theme I think that we've heard so far. And now we're finally hearing the Yoda B section, which was, okay, this Yoda B theme, this perky dotted was originally going to be in the scene in Dagobah when we are meeting Yoda, but we don't know that it's Yoda. But as we discussed in that episode, we discussed it in ESB 13, Spooky Insecurities with Ender Smith. It was taken out. Irvin Kershner took it out, took the music out there. So now we're hearing it in the credits. Okay. Yoda again. Now listen to those low brass syncopating. That's called syncopation. Let's go back to hear that better. Okay. So the syncopation refers to the displacement of that beat, basically. I mean, the beat hasn't been displaced. It's just where the horns are, where the brass, it's not just horns, are playing is offset. Not anymore. Now, yes. So we're continuing with Yoda's theme. Yoda's theme is getting, let's see, 3:30. It's gotten more than a minute. So now we are on the Imperial March vamp and the Imperial March theme. At this point, the scrolling credits are going on. Okay. I highly recommend, over the course of this season, one of the exciting things that has happened is that Frank Lehman updated his complete catalog of the musical themes of Star Wars. He did a big overhaul of it, and there's a lot more detail in the section on the Imperial March. So I do recommend that resource if you want to see a more granular breakdown of the Imperial March elements. So even in this span of time that we've been hearing the Imperial March, let's see, in the 5 minutes, this is 4:23, and the Imperial March started at 3:34, so about 50 seconds in. The melody has been passed to different sections. Like what I'm hearing is like 8 bars or 16 bars of this arrangement, or, what am I talking about? And then it's kind of switches to like something else. So it's not so frenetic that it's like different every bar, but it's like, different sections are happening. God, that doesn't make sense. Okay, right here, I hear like an awkward shift. Do you hear it in the violin? It's kind of the similar thing to what I was talking about with the horn earlier. And I don't mean to point out like errors that people are making. This is one that I'm not sure if it's like I'm not pointing it out to say these players are terrible. These players are fantastic. It's more like being able to hear a few seams here and there, I think has a practical benefit of being able to explain that, shifting can sound like that on instruments. And so that all the times you don't hear that, those are very smooth shifts. It just kind of reveals something about the mechanics of certain instruments, if that makes sense. And whether that was a player missing a shift, it didn't sound like it to me because it was pretty big. Or if it was something to do with the recording technology or with the tape or something where it created an artifact like that, I think it does. It reveals a seam in the technology, or it's an example of something that can happen. And so, yeah, I think that's an interesting artifact there. If I had to guess, I would say that the first thing that we hear with the horn, I would say that's just the sound of the horn playing the next note. It's hard to jump to make a big leap like that. And actually pretty normal. This one, I would almost guess that it's an editing thing. I'm not sure though. So now we've done a sudden key change as we are doing the Imperial March vamp. Imperial March in a new key. It makes sense. It's getting a lot of so the melody, D D D D D D. The orchestra feels split up into like two main groups. The group that is doing the melody, including the rhythm, and then the group that is doing like all of the offbeats. And they kind of lock together. They kind of lock in together as like a puzzle, like pieces that are supposed to fit together. And this is an example of like the way that Imperial music sounds more like it fits, like it's engineered to fit perfectly, like it's more square than the Rebel music. So you can hear like the interlocking pieces. Okay, that's the end of the 5 minutes. We will talk about the rest of the end credits next week. Definitely. So yeah, that's the 5 minutes. We heard the Force theme, Han and Leia's theme, the main theme A section, Rebel fanfare, descending heroic tetrachords, Yoda theme A section, Yoda theme B section, the Imperial March vamp, the Imperial March theme, and the track is Rebel Fleet and end title. And I think the part of the Yoda stuff potentially might also have been on Yoda in the Force. I'm not sure though. But definitely Rebel Fleet and end title. Yeah, okay. Let's see. I guess it's time to move on to the 30 things. 30 takeaways. 30 takeaways, trends, surprises, and highlights from the Empire Strikes Back season of Star Wars Music Minute. Now, these, for my own sanity, because these season opening and season closing, or even though this is not the last episode of the season, but these episodes take a lot of time to put together, and sometimes I can just really overthink it and not like take way too long to record it. So I listed these things not in any particular order. So it's just going to be like a fun grab bag of 30 things. And I'm sure I missed some. So some of these are going to be bigger topics. Some of these are just going to be small, like bullet point, move on. But these are just things that I have thought about this season, things that many guests brought up. So trends, things that surprised me, sort of highlights, I don't need to explain what that means. It's just going to be 30 things, and we're going to start now. All right. I have a little, let's get the keynote presentation up just for the title cards. Okay. Number 1, the Battle of Hoth is long. This was the first sort of surprising thing. I had forgotten how long the Battle of Hoth was. I should have known when I looked at the soundtrack and saw that the Battle of Hoth track was like 11 minutes long or something ridiculous like that. No, 15 minutes long. What am I talking about? So yeah, the Battle of Hoth spilled into 3-4 episodes of this show. This seemed to surprise guests too. And kind of related to that, the way that we go so quickly from the Battle of Hoth to the Asteroid Field to Luke's arrival on Dagobah, that whole, like 1, 2, 3, that felt so much shorter than I expected. I guess the spaces between them, because in my head, I think about The Empire Strikes Back. I think Battle of Hoth's at the beginning of the movie. Dagobah's in the middle of the movie. Asteroid Field's also in the middle of the movie, but really, they all happened in such quick succession, and like with no filler. I think that's just the amazing thing. Is like I couldn't believe exiting the Battle of Hoth, we were already entering the Asteroid Field. Just like how lucky are we? Yeah, no time wasted, and just all of this amazing music. Like I seriously, I thought after the Battle of Hoth, there's probably just like not going to be that much interesting music. There's not going to be another greatest hits, so soon after, but there really is. And that is also just kind of an overall trend of the season, is like so many consecutive bangers. Okay, number 2. Droid's leitmotif. That was new this season. Well, new this film, and by extension, this season. The droid's leitmotif was not present in A New Hope. And to remind you, it's the dee-dee-dee-dee-dee, dee-dee-dee sort of woodwind thing, usually on woodwinds, sort of a jaunty, sort of a playful motif that represents R2 and 3PO. And this leitmotif does not appear in any of the other saga films. It only ever appears again in Solo: A Star Wars Story, very briefly. So I'm going to tell you the way that Frank Lehman describes this motif, and I'll also put on screen a screenshot from his brand new catalog of what the droid's leitmotif section looks like. All right. Cheery, off-kilter theme for R2 and C-3PO in quirky quasi-march idiom more generally associated with aliens and droids. And I will say that this kind of also follows how the Jawas were represented in A New Hope as well. Okay. Developed to an appreciable extent in Empire Strikes Back, but seemingly abandoned for good afterwards, droids later accompanied by non-thematic, though often similar in tone, music. One near instance in Return of the Jedi, R10P5, slyly referenced in Powell's Solo. And then the key features are repetitions of descending 3 or 4 note motif on onset. And so by that, it's... So 3 notes or 4 notes. Or... in an overall major key, but governed by non-functional harmony, particularly hexatonic, A2 and M3-based progressions and intervals. 2 forms differing in degree of syncopation, continuation. I just played the 2 forms. And then emblematic statements on solo woodwinds, tuba, etc. And so, yeah, I guess the first thing that popped into my head was solo woodwinds, but tuba is definitely another one as well. All right. More about the droids. In addition to just the droids motif that blessed us in this movie, I will say, I think my favorite instances of the droids motif my favorite instances occur on Dagobah, potentially. Although I like all of them. I think the ones on Dagobah where R2 and Yoda are kind of they're kind of having a little tiff. They're kind of not getting along at first. I like when the droids motifs show up there. But in general, droids as a motif, I mean, in this film, our droid friends were separated for most of the movie, it seemed. And I feel like the relationship between R2 and 3PO was such a highlight, and guests and listeners sort of independently had a lot to say about these droids. I think their reunion comes at a time where it's able to provide much comic relief and smaller scale levels of resolvable tension amidst the chaos and drama of the third act of the main story. So like all those little, when the banter is back, it feels quote unquote like home, like something is stable in our universe. Something is stable in the story, and it's the bickering between R2 and 3PO. Yeah. All right, number 3. The music is meanwhile. Okay, this concept came up many times throughout the season with different names, I would say. The most recent being in Dan Golding's episode when he said that the music is meanwhile. And I was like, what does that mean? And he was saying that the music is like, we're in one place and then the music reminds us what's going on in like another part of the story. The music is kind of always keeping tabs. It's kind of narrating what's happening. It's helping us just have this like fuller context of what is going on in the story. Now, I think that a related concept is something that was brought up by Connor Power in his episode, and that was that the music is the scorekeeper. We were discussing the Battle of Hoth, and we were kind of trying to, quote unquote, keep tally the scores of who was winning. And we were hearing how the music was like deftly swapping, trading off between like things that sounded more Imperial, things that sounded more Rebel, and how it was kind of always just like doing so much, handing out contextual cues. And I think that is just a big takeaway from The Empire Strikes Back, because it's very dense with contextual clues. It makes the score extremely rich, and I can't think of a single time, though now we'll probably be proven wrong, besides the end credits, where we just hear like 2 or 3 uninterrupted minutes of just like the love theme grooving along in its love themeness. Like, I feel like we are always hearing a little fanfare pop in, or like something reminding us that the Empire is on our shoulder. Like, there's always there's so often is an acknowledgement of a detail on screen, like we're passing by something, a funny moment happens, and there's a quick acknowledgement of that. The droids motif comes in at a time where the overall drama is not about the droids. So there are just so many reminders here and there of what else is taking place, either off screen or on screen. This also comes in the form of mini fanfares all over the place, mini fanfares. I would think I called them in one episode like, we got that fanfare for free. Like he did not have to give us this extra fanfare, but he did. He is John Williams. There's also like, Luke in Cloud City when he decides to just let go, a little fanfare for that. This came up a lot during the season. I will even say that like, even in Camilla's episode, in episode 23, Camilla brought up the fact that there were so many inquisitive interjections in the music, just sprinkled, like even throughout the dialogue, and that they were kind of sprinkled throughout the orchestra. And I feel like this stems from the same concept, or it feels related to me. No space wasted. It's a dense score. No space wasted on repetitive loops, just cruising for 2 minutes. oh my gosh, yeah. I think it just makes the score like a cut above so many other things. And a big part of why I feel that is I think the music is meanwhile, the music as an entity that provides a lot of context and subtext, and the music is what helps us read between the lines, or at least feel between the lines. Yeah, whew. Okay, number 4. Oh, okay. Number 4, negative musical space. And by this, I'm just referring to, as a highlight from this movie, as a takeaway, just all of the times where John Williams wrote music for a scene and Irvin Kershner cut it out. And we had instead silence, or not silence, because sound design is still there, but no music. And, one instance is when we arrive on Dagobah with Yoda. Another instance is on Hoth, sort of toward the beginning when Luke is out. There's music that was cut for that, and you can hear it on the special edition soundtrack. But there were just numerous places throughout this movie where it seemed that a decision was made that less is more, and that removing music might heighten its impact later. And I think there are many instances of that, which we'll talk about a little bit later in this list. All right. Another thing from this season, number 5, Luke's instrument. I don't really have anything too deep to say here, but this season I sort of posited that I think the trumpet is representing Luke in this movie, or at least in a scene. And I think, was it Father David or someone, or it was either Father David or Trevor who said, no, it's French horn. And then Dan Golding said, the clarinet is what is representing Luke. And obviously the answer is that it's not a paint by number. It's not, I don't think there's going to be one solid answer, and it might change from scene to scene. But just this question has been passed around this season of, within a cue at least, is there an instrument that is more representative of Luke than the others? And so even in all of these instruments that I just named, whether it's trumpet, French horn, or clarinet, there is one thing in common, and that is that none of them are string instruments. So I don't think anyone, would try to make a case that the cello represents Luke. It is clearly a wind or a brass instrument, which is interesting. All right. 6, music of the Force. The Force has a much more present and musical sound in The Empire Strikes Back compared to A New Hope. Now, obviously, we just see a whole lot more of the Force being used in this movie than we do in A New Hope. So that all makes sense. One example of this is the Force buzz, and that's something that Dan brought up, which is sort of that buzz. I don't know. It sounds it sounds exactly like what it is exactly what it sounds like, a Force buzz. There's also what I think of as a burbling, as a rising and falling, and I'm thinking of instances like when Luke is in Cloud City and just gets tossed out the window. Not tossed, you know what I mean. Falls out the window. And I'm also thinking when he's hanging upside down in the Wampa's lair and is really trying to grab his lightsaber, and we hear the stuff. All right, I should just do the wiser thing and play a little example. Okay. Hopefully I'm needle dropping to a good place.
Right now. Might I have a word? Yes, sir.
Here we go. See, this burbling. It's this frenetic rising and falling scale thing. You can almost hear the Force gathering power before he does it here. See, here we go. A fanfare. Just a fanfare erupts from the force burble or force buzz. So the ways in which the force sounds musical in this film also extend to Yoda. So many magical sounds associated with Yoda on Dagobah, and we have things like the instrument. In episode I think 16 with Jeremy Sarek. Was it episode 16? We were we were making a list. We made a whole list of like instruments that we associate with like magicalness, and in that scene we were, I think, did we have Yoda in that scene? I can't remember, but we were just talking about like the celeste and the magical instruments and all that, and I think that also has a big presence in this film, particularly when it's dawning on Luke who Yoda is, and we hear the realization in the music, and this, I answered this, or we talked about this in an episode this season, and I talked about it also in the A New Hope season finale. But there's just like a magical sound. There are magical force sounds, different types of force sounds, whether it's like the force being used, and this extends to sound design as well. And then just more of like thinking about the force, summoning the force. And then of course the force theme is really out in full. Sorry, forgive me, force. This film as well. Whereas in the previous film, one could say, oh, a lot of it is Ben. It's Obi-Wan's theme. So it's like Obi-Wan is the force in that film. But in this film, Obi-Wan is no longer synonymous with Luke's only example of the force, if you know what I mean. All right. Number 7, that synthesizer got me. The ARP 2600 synthesizer is used throughout the soundtrack in numerous cues, as well as being the synthesizer used for R2-D2's voice. And yeah, this is the synth that took not only myself, but lots of listeners by storm. Many of us were unaware of the synth, or were much less aware of the synth than we wished that we had been. Like, even though I knew that the synth was present in this score, you heard me stumble this season on certain points where I was like, I think this is where the synth comes in, but I'm not sure. Like, there were many times where I feel like the synth parts were blurry. Like, I couldn't exactly tell which line was the synth or not. And I'm getting better at telling where that is, but I mean, I'm going to have to listen to this score and watch this film many more times before I can even come close to spotting every single instance of the synth, because it's blended so well, in my opinion, and really feels like part of the orchestra. But anyway, I just need to shout out the ARP 2600, which had a guest starring role in this film. All right. Number 8, the wind. The wind was just a highlight. The wind on Hoth and Cloud City, and hearing about Ben Burtt's, how Ben Burt made the wind. The wind was mentioned by many guests, as a highlight, or just like as a very important thing contributing to the soundscape. And I obviously agree. Yeah, I don't even know. Should I go over it? Should I remind everyone how the wind was made? I can do that. Okay. The wind, according to Ben Burt in interviews. So one thing is running a pencil down a piece of rough canvas. I don't know what that would, I don't have a piece of rough canvas here. No. And remiking it closely. He said that gives you a beautiful sound of wind. And then also the ambiance in the central air passage was produced with this old mechanical wind-making machine, It's a device which had an electric motor, and you could put different rings into it, like donut-shaped kind of washers into it, and it would spin like a musical instrument. The air passing over these little washers would make a windy sound. So yeah, the wind. That was a highlight. Moving on. Number 9, horror as a lens. I am not very, I'm no horror expert, so I really benefited from having guests this season who were very attuned to horror as a genre, horror tropes, horror, what types of things could be seen as horror. God, horror. Can someone coach me on this word? Horror, homages, etc. Horror came up in at least 3 or 4 episodes. There was Susan Tekla-Kruglinska episode, which is called, oh no, I just listed her. Okay, well, we talked about horror in the Minox scene and horror with a punchline. That's what that episode was called. And she's one of the more horror expert people that I know, and was pointing out how many things reminded her of Hitchcock. And after that, on Dagobah with the magic tree, and this was in the episode called Spooky Insecurities with Ender Smith, the music that we're hearing in there is also evocative of horror score elements, which I'm probably a little bit more familiar with. But when I say horror as a lens, I mean, by the way, musically, visually, lighting, I mean, many things. Even in episode 21 with Takeo Rivera, Takeo was bringing up the brightness on Cloud City as like brightness as a space of horror, and comparing it to another film. Moreover, in the Emperor scene, we are hearing music that has this really striking high-low pitch contrast, and you can hear more about that in episode 11. But Frank Lehman was sharing that Paul Hirsch, editor, had shared with him that scene was temped with some, the same, I don't know if this is confirmed, with some Bartok music that was perhaps also temp tracked in a Hitchcock movie. So to hear kind of a horror sounding, like really eerie music in Empire Strikes Back, especially in the midst of especially especially in the grand scheme of all the different idioms that John Williams is drawing from in this film, it made me really see a stronger connection between he is actually pulling from perhaps horror idioms here, or things that are in that world, Perhaps he thinks he's pulling from Bartok, but a horror film also pulls from Bartok, so they end up sharing this common, they end up having Bartok in common. And so, yeah. I guess what I'm saying is I am thinking more about horror because of this season. All right, number 10, Yoda's theme. This was another notable addition, another magical addition to this film. And I feel like Yoda's theme almost replaces Ben's theme in some use cases. Obviously, the Force theme is still present. The Force theme has not gone anywhere. But in terms of the theme sitting on Luke's shoulder as he goes through adventures and needs guidance and needs to summon strength, I feel like that was Yoda's theme, especially after Luke left Dagobah. We hear Yoda's theme quite a bit in Cloud City, and several guests have kind of we've talked about it in several episodes. Like, why do you think Yoda's theme is being played here? And I think it is like the new Jiminy Cricket theme for for Luke, at least in this movie, which makes sense. Luke in A New Hope has just been sort of, trained by Ben, and so Ben is his like mentor. And after being trained by Yoda, Yoda is sort of his mentor, at least immediately. He's still, as we hear later when he's hanging on that weather vane, I don't actually know if it's meant to be a weather vane. He does call for Ben, but yeah, it's kind of nice that we have this new theme to free the Force theme up, I think, to be more of a general Force theme, perhaps. But also, I think it's nice that we have two very distinct magic adjacent themes, where it's not just like one theme has to carry all of the Force, all of the Force and magical and mystical moments. We have two actually quite different themes to do that work in many different ways. Like we don't always hear Yoda's theme in the same way. We hear it on all these different instruments. We hear it fast. Like I bet, like if you listen back to Cloud City or watch again, you might notice new places where you didn't even realize that it was Yoda's theme popping in, because it's like played really hurriedly on like muted brass and sounds more like in line with a march. Like these themes are flexible. Yoda's theme is really flexible, very magical addition. A+. All right, number 11. The Elgar Walton influence is still alive and well in The Empire Strikes Back. Maybe the first time we talked about it was in A New Hope at the end during the medal ceremony music. And what I'm talking about is that very British Edwardian sounding Crown Imperial, pomp and circumstance sounding music that John Williams in real life is very fond of and was sort of, these are formative influences for him, and he intentionally draws from them often. We hear instances of, like we hear this Elgar Walton influence in places like Lando's theme, or at least the Cloud City theme. But we also hear it in little spots in the Battle of Hoth. Like, it kind of makes its way. It makes its way in the film, and I think it's just because this is one of many traditions, one of many idioms, I guess, one of many musical languages, styles that John Williams is adept at taking on without making it seem like he's doing a thing. I will say it does sound like he's doing a thing when it comes to when it comes to the Cloud City theme, but we'll talk about that in a second. Table that. That is a time where in A New Hope, in the medal ceremony, that is clearly John Williams is doing an Elgar thing right there, obviously. Lando's theme in Cloud City, definitely doing a thing. In Battle of Hoth, in that tiny sliver, he's doing a thing, but he's not turning the whole Battle of Hoth into a William Walton tribute. It's just, little pockets here and there. And I'm thinking when, go to the scene where Luke is like, I feel like I'm on top. What does he say? I feel like this is on top of the world. I feel like I can do anything or something. He's talking to Dak or something like that. Yeah, that kind of before they're about to battle. All right, number 12. 3PO's melodious humor. Oh my gosh, 3PO, this is a very good movie for 3PO, and a lot of his humor, I don't know if it's because of his melodious delivery, and I mean it in the sense that Anthony Daniels' voice as 3PO has an incredibly, lilting, it's certainly not monotone, put it that way. Okay, the most recent example that I can think of is Wonderful, which we talked about in episode 22. But his voice has like an arc to it when he speaks. Wonderful, like I feel like it's very memeable, like if they're like sound memeable, you know? There were also moments where, at least one moment where I feel it almost sounded like his dialogue was perhaps recorded once and like doubled or something. I'm thinking of an instance where he goes, Master Solo, and it sounds like the exact same thing twice. I don't know, but just 3PO appreciation. That was just a highlight. Okay, number 13, Lando trajectory. All right, a lot of guests this season shared that they were inherently mistrustful of Lando when we first meet him on screen, or at least like were when they were young or whatever. And I think the music greatly contributes to this outcome. Also, it doesn't help that Han himself says that he can't trust him. So like I think the movie sets us up to not trust Lando. So it's natural to be mistrustful of Lando at first. And to go back to the Elgarian, Walton, Orban Scepter, pomp and circumstance influence, Cloud City, the music we hear on Cloud City is so overtly formal and pompous that I think it makes us pause and say, like, what's actually going on here? Just to remind you. Right, like it sounds like such a polished operation, and they're in the clouds. Like it's music you could graduate to. Right? Like this music sounds like it sounds like an extremely perfect white smile that like stays on all the time, and you're like, "Are you okay? Are you okay? Should I be worried about you?" That's how we meet Lando, and the fact that his story the fact that we learn pretty soon that he is crossing his friend reinforces the fact that we couldn't trust that music to begin with. I think it's a really clever way of evoking a style on purpose and having it, having its effects be felt by the audience. Now, of course, I can't speak for everyone. This is just a hypothesis, but it is a very deliberate decision to write a theme that goes like that. And I feel like it very much falls in line with Lando's presentation of Cloud City, how everything looks so white and clean, and, you know, his outfits are impeccable, and, you know, it's that uncanny space where you're just a little bit nervous. Things should not be going this well, should they? Now, number 13 is Lando trajectory. So another common trend this season was that many guests shared that while they initially didn't like Lando, pretty much everyone I talked to ended up, as adults, cutting him slack. Like, I can name several guests, like Alex Ludwig, my brother Nick Dan, Dan Golding, Takeo Rivera, like many guests who had a Lando scene or had some Lando part to talk about shared that they didn't like him as kids, but now they're like, totally understand your line of decision making, and definitely probably would have done the same thing, maybe. Or at least, you know, we can understand the pressure that he was under, and why should he give up his whole business to help this person he doesn't even really like that much? Yeah, so that's the Lando trajectory. Number 14, almost halfway. Han and Leia's theme. I mean, obviously a new addition to this movie. How amazing is it? It was absolutely a season highlight, just very earnestly. The theme and talking about the theme, everything about this theme. When I say the theme, like, as with all of these themes, or many of these themes, it's not just like one static 16-bar presentation of it. Like, there are so many different ways that it can rip your heart out. Rip my heart out. This theme is, I don't know, it conveys so much emotion, majesty, hope, tragedy. It's tender and powerful, and raises one's spirits, and has made many of us yearn and feel terrible loss. Yeah, this theme is like, I think it's like the ultimate love theme, I think. It's love personified. Because it's not like just sappy romance. It's like filled with tension and struggle. Listening to this theme, it's complicated. Yeah. Okay. Number 15. Oh, this is just personal highlight. Personal highlight for me is the music when we arrive on Cloud City. That violin and choir stuff, I'm kind of obsessed with. Just it really took me to a whole new place. Takes me and took me when I talked about it in episode 16. And yeah, I just have much more appreciation for that whole musical moment when we are, first, arriving in the atmosphere of Cloud City. It's like how, so Cloud City is a very new type of place. It's in the clouds. It's a whole specific new thing. And so I'm thinking, like, if I were a composer, how would I evoke, basically, I didn't know that John Williams had it in him. I mean, I know that he had it in him, but in the context of Star Wars, it's like somehow he managed to even surprise me even more. And I'm speaking as if I didn't already know this film. But there are many things about this film that I feel like I was hearing for the first time this season, just because of going through it in so much detail. And it doesn't last. It lasts, a minute at tops, and then we never hear that music again. But so it's possible that I just didn't pay attention to it as much before. Let me see if I can find an example of it. Okay. Sorry, I'm needle dropping. Okay.
No, I don't have a landing permit. I'm trying.
Okay, we're approaching there.
Lando Calrissian.
Okay. And in this episode, you might recall that we talked about comparing it to Sibelius Violin Concerto. And then also, like, the sci-fi voice, the sci-fi choir, in my opinion. Here we are.
Permission granted. Land on platform 327.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh. And this choir
Don't worry about it. We go way back.
about to come in.
Who's worried?
Oh, it's so like lush in a completely different way than Han and Leia's theme, John Williams has many different versions of being lush. But yeah, that theme. I guess one reason, like, as I hear it right now in the context of the film, the choir is a little bit hard to hear compared to the soundtrack, where it's really amped up. And probably that's one of the reasons a lot of this felt like I was hearing things for the first time, which is because, as I've mentioned many times on this podcast, I have never been much of a soundtrack listener. Like, when I listen to scores, it's in the context of the film, hence the framing of this podcast. But things like this kind of make me feel like maybe I should listen to the soundtracks themselves more. Yeah, it's a treat. Okay. Number 16. The wildlife / sonic atmosphere of Dagobah. Oh, Dagobah sounds so cool. That was just a highlight. I don't have much to say about that, except we talked about it a lot in episode 13 with Ender Smith, and he brought up that amazing wildlife book. I can't remember the exact name of it, and was talking about the different some of the different animals that are on Dagobah. Now, the book is not quote unquote canon, so I don't know if officially any of whatever, but just the fact that there's such a rich sound environment on Dagobah. Not only the individual sounds, like we talked about the glissando lizard, the various sounding bats and flying things and like croaking things, but also the sound of the space. Like the way that Luke sounds when he's talking on Dagobah, the way that R2's beeps echo in Dagobah. It's a very specific vibe sonically, and yeah, just total highlight. Number 17, the ad hoc rebel music compared to the stiff and polished Imperial music. I already touched upon this when we were talking about the end credits and the Imperial March, and how the various parts of it seem to interlock pretty evenly. Like dee 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 dee. You know, I'm doing this thing with my hands because it makes more sense if I explain it that way. Basically, I'm like full threading my fingers together and making kind of a right angle. I don't know. That's kind of what that sounds like to me. Okay. Anyway, yeah, this came up many times this season in different ways. It came up, of course, in the musical scorekeeper. Is that what that episode is called? The musical scorekeeper stuff with the Battle of Hoth, and we were kind of comparing the different ways that the Imperial and Rebel music sound, even as early as, I think, episode 2 with Christina Ward, or episode 5 maybe with Stephanie Manning. We were also talking about, there we go. In episode 5 with Stephanie Manning, we were talking about the sweet elongated string lines the sweet elongated string lines of the Rebels versus the short, sharp lines of the Imperials. And we weren't talking broad strokes like it's always like this. We were talking specifically in this cue. However, that the gist of that has come up all over this season, and honestly, the franchise. It is a pretty telltale. I would say it's a common musical thread that happens throughout Star Wars, and I wouldn't even say it's new to Empire Strikes Back, but it is something that came up a lot, and of course Dan Golding talked about that a lot as well. Number 18, pedal points. These were also a common topic of discussion in Dan Golding's episode, in Alex Ludwig's episode, I'm sure in Frank Lehman's episode, actually Dominic Suez, a lot of episodes, pedal points were discussed. So a pedal point is like a note that is sustained while other stuff is happening. And I think Soundtrack Aficionado asked me on Twitter to kind of review the importance of this pedal point moment in episode 22. And what I'll say about pedal points is this. Pedal points have come up in every season of this show. In Solo, we talked about it a lot. In L3's death scene, pedal points This is a bad example. Basically, the note that I'm holding, what am I doing here? Pedal points can create a lot of tension because when you have melodic material above a pedal point, that is not necessarily, especially if the material is not obviously related to the pedal point, or is, okay, if the pedal point can subvert an expectation of a changing bass note. Okay, let me see if I can play an example. All right. However, I will just say that regardless, this pedal point stuff was absolutely a highlight this season. There were many parts in this film where, again, just like with other Star Wars movies, an extended pedal point really heightened either tension or just like a sense of something being unfulfilled. Okay.
We're not interested in the hyperdrive on the Millennium Falcon. It's fixed. Just open the door, you stupid lump!
Okay, I think we're about to get to a spot, but I'm just gonna... Okay. No, so...
I never doubted you for a second. Wonderful!
Okay. If you couldn't hear that, I'll play that again. So when Han and Leia's theme starts...
Wonderful!
See what I mean with wonderful? It's so wonderful. Okay, when Han and Leia's theme starts, we have this bass note, and it's a G, and it's going to be incessantly played or held throughout a large part of this theme.
Just open the door, you stupid lump!
Now, the reason that's surprising, or not surprising, is that pedal is actually built into the Han and Leia theme. And I'm going to hum the melody of the Han and Leia theme and play kind of what you would expect in a melody that doesn't have like a purposeful pedal point, what you'd expect the harmony to do. So. This is not good. I'm struggling to even play Han and Leia's theme without the pedal because it's baked into it, so I feel like I'm just playing something wrong. But anyway, it's the held nature of that bottom note, and it ends up creating tensions. That's the shortest way I can explain it. Okay, that was a highlight. Number 19, Yoda puppetry. Okay, this was also a highlight. Shout out to Ken Plume for teaching me about live hands situations. And so this is something I never noticed in The Empire Strikes Back before. I didn't have any appreciation for. And it's when you see like the puppet doing something with both hands, that means you know that there has to be more than one person operating the puppet so that one person can do both hands, if that makes sense. So just like the casual way I, as a viewer, have been able to all these years just watch these scenes and not feel like anything is wrong is a testament to how incredible this puppetry is. Yeah, so love Puppet Yoda. That was a big highlight. Okay, number 20. We're going pretty quickly. This is good. 20 is extreme instrumentations. That has been a theme this season, this movie. And by that I mean like unusual orchestra configurations. Now we know from the liner notes and, just accounts that the Battle of Hoth, for example, used an unusual orchestration calling for 5 piccolos, 5 oboes, a battery of 8 percussion, 2 grand pianos, 2 or 3 harps, in addition to the normal orchestral complement. And this, reading from the liner notes, this was necessary in order to achieve a bizarre, mechanical, brutal sound for the sequence, the Battle of Hoth sequence. But instances where like a lot of piccolos, which is unusual, are brought in, or just like even thinking of like adding in the synth, which I wouldn't say is like actually a quote unquote extreme instrumentation. I'm considering, I think something like 2 grand pianos constitutes like a quote unquote extreme instrumentation, because it's something beyond, you have to, it's a very specific ask, put it that way. It's very specific. In an orchestra, you typically don't have more than one pianist, more than 1 or 2 harps. You certainly don't have 5 piccolos. So it's like a specific, thing that they would have had to, the contractors would have had to go out and acquire specifically for this score. So, yeah, that has been great. 21, Yoda theme oboe demonstration. This is just a highlight. It was just a highlight when Trevor Mowry, who is an oboist, in his episode, when he played the Yoda theme on the oboe. Yeah, that's all. I just, even thinking about it, I'm like, I don't know, just like hearing someone play it. Listen to that episode. It's timestamped where the demonstration is. That was definitely a highlight for me. I really liked hearing it. And I should mention, he plays the part of the Yoda theme where Yoda raises the ship. Another one of those moments in this score where I just get overwhelmed and have to like take a breather if I have to be on camera. All right, number 22. People had opinions about Boba Fett's voiceover change. Now, the film that we used for this season was the 2004 DVD film, so we did have the Boba Fett with Tamora Morrison's voice. And I would say that there was pretty much a general consensus amongst guests that we, and myself, that we like Tamora Morrison, and the continuity of the change makes sense, and we like it for that reason. But all of us were a little concerned about the possibility of erasing history, and we hope that not too many like actors are erased from Star Wars history in the future. That was the main concern. And I think you could extrapolate that to how we feel about perhaps other kinds of looming tweaks on the horizon in the Star Wars universe. But that one in particular was, and it was made even more, I think what made it even more slightly concerning was just that it's so hard to find like a record of who did the original voice. Yeah. We talked about that in the episode with Pete and Alex from Star Wars Minute, and also the episode with James and Justin from the Band Batch. Okay, number 23. Filigree. 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 An ornamental line, usually a scale or a run, that complements or acts as an energetic add-on to the direction of the music, whether that be up or down. This term was coined by Tim Rodier, passed on to Ed Bueller, adopted by Dominic Sewell, who passed it on to me, and so now we all use the term filigree. This score has so many instances of especially woodwind filigree, where the woodwinds will just kind of go like, just like all over the place. And honestly, hearing Dominic call it filigree, it just immediately, that term made sense to me, and I started hearing it all throughout the score and being able to kind of refer to it as that. I don't know, it just, perhaps it sometimes just having like the perfect word to describe a thing that you know exists, but since you don't know the word, you don't bring it up that much. Sometimes just having the language to describe something helps so much, and it makes it possible to discuss and share with others. And filigree is just perfect. So thank you to Tim Rodier and Ed Bueller and Dom. And filigree is here to stay. I think we're going to hear it in all the other scores coming up. I mean, we certainly will. And yeah, so now that I'm aware of filigree, that has been a highlight. So I have Dom to thank for that, for passing that on to me. Number 24, music as a warm blanket. So this is another one of those concepts similar to the concept is not similar to the music is meanwhile, but similar to that concept, this concept also has a few branches and different ways that it came up this season. It came up a lot this season, even though it was referred to in different ways. But in my head, I've synthesized them into all like one related thing. And music being the warm blanket is something that Takeo Rivera said. Like, he's the one who used that phrase, and he said it in episode 21. And what he meant by that is like, the music lets us know what kind of story that we're listening to. It's a warm blanket in that we know, it lets us know either, it grounds us in what we are experiencing, and it kind of guides us through emotional moments and is like with us along the way, kind of comforting us, even if the music itself isn't comforting. And this was something that came up on my Discord server, was like, I think someone was saying like, oh, in this part, I don't feel like the strings are acting as the warm blanket. And I think the way that I interpreted this is that even if the strings in one section are actually sounding quite, evoking danger, overall, the existence of the score, even doing that, is like, it's guiding us. It's like a warm blanket because it's like a guide and a witness on our journey, and just something that's not going to leave our side. It's more along those lines. Nick Tan, my brother, also said something during his episode, which was episode 18, when we were talking about 3PO getting tortured, and I, being a 3PO defender, sort of joked like, do you like seeing 3PO suffer, or like you think that's funny? And Nick was like, well, I knew he was going to be all right. And that's kind of the point. Like, the music never signals to us that we should redirect our primary focus from the struggle from the main struggle to this 3PO struggle. Like, it's never, somehow the music kind of lets us know that, like, even though we're watching 3PO be like, oh no, help me, like, my arm is off. Okay, 3PO is not saying those exact lines, but even though we're seeing 3PO struggle, the music's not telling us, like, oh no, 3PO might not be with us by the end of this film. And like because of like the music is helping us keep our focus where it needs to be. And it would actually have been tonally shocking if it turned out that 3PO ended up not surviving this incident on Cloud City. Do you know what I mean? And this is also, in my opinion, related to what Dan Golding was saying in his episode 22. He had told the story about how Allen Ginsberg saw the first Star Wars movie, and as soon as he saw A Long Time Ago in a Galaxy Far, Far Away, he turned to his film-going companion and said, "Oh, thank God, I don't have to worry about it." Meaning that he didn't have to worry about it being an intensely depressing sci-fi movie about human failure, because of just A Long Time Ago in a Galaxy Far, Far Away. Just the wording, the aesthetic, it signified what kind of story it was going to be. And I think the music does the same thing. It manages our emotions, keeps us on a swashbuckling journey where even when the heroes are down, we know that we're in for something heroic, fairy tale-ish, fable-ish. It's like an aesthetic orientation is the music as a warm blanket. Even the fact that it's like almost operatic or balletic at times, it kind of, it orients us a bit, it's footing. And I agree with overall the music as the warm blanket. And the other example that I really think of is in A New Hope when Vader strikes down Obi-Wan and Luke watches this, and one could, this is kind of, imagine if there was no music there. It could have been a horrifying thing to watch. It could have been extremely tragic. And it was somewhat tragic, but it wasn't like gut-wrenching tragic. It wasn't the focus. So what do we hear when that happens? We hear Leia's theme in A New Hope after Obi-Wan is struck down. And Luke is dealing with the loss of Obi-Wan, but the music shuttles us into other things. And I think the way that Leia's theme comes again, I'm talking about A New Hope in this case, after Obi-Wan is struck down, rather than it being some like Dies Irae type of thing or some like solemn dirge-like thing, which is what we get in Empire Strikes Back, actually. It is kind of keeping us up even when we're down. You know what I mean? Yeah, music as a warm blanket. I don't know, music as a witness as well. Okay, number 25. The snowspeeder music on Hoth was reused from the end. This was something that I didn't realize when we were talking about it in episode 4 with Jen Harding. We were talking in that episode about how like perfect that snowspeeder music why do I ever try to sing that trumpet line? You know what I mean. The snowspeeder music when they're like looking out in the morning looking for Han and Luke. I feel like it works like really, really perfectly there. However, it was originally meant for the end and is in the end of the movie, in the Rescue from Cloud City hyperspace. And yeah, somehow I didn't realize that. So thank you for people who helped me realize that. And then also, obviously it became obvious as I continued throughout the movie. But yeah, I guess that's just a surprise / kind of a highlight. It's interesting because since I didn't know that it was actually reused from the end, like literally like the recording, I think was put in from the end is put into this part of the beginning. Since my introduction to this theme and my knowledge of it is primarily the snowspeeder music on Hoth, my bias is to think that it was meant for the snowspeeder, stuff on Hoth. So when I think about it, even though it's incorrect, I think about it as it relates to that scene, not the scene that it was originally written for. So, I mean, perception and I think the way that the order in which things are introduced, I think always has such a big impact on our interpretation, our lens. And this is one where clearly I know what the right answer is, and it's too late. It's already hardwired into my brain as being more fitting for Hoth. I would say even more fitting than it is for the end of the movie. But yeah. Okay, number 26. The pseudo-bald mountain motif. I'm going to start referring to it from now on. So, yeah, people listening to this season have been warned. Yeah, this is just something that comes up. It comes up a lot in Empire Strikes Back. It's also not uncommon in Star Wars stuff. It's not like so common that it's every episode. It's not as common as the Force theme or Imperial March, but that pseudo-bald mountain motif, or the sort of, I think Dom has started calling it something too, the pseudo-Mazorsky bald mountain-esque motif. I mean, it's really, it's more of a gesture. It's the gesture of, it's actually two-part. One part is the frenetic, fast-paced, chromatic string stuff going like some version of something like that. And the second part of it is when there's that high strings doing that thing with low brass doing an ominous, not so fast melody. Just think of Bald Mountain, yeah. Came up a lot. Yeah, so that's all I wanted to say. I don't really have any more thoughts about it. It came up, comes up in times of obviously like terror, distress, potential, like possibly action, but I would say it probably is more symbolic of distress and just something very heightened, which is why we hear it a lot in the last act of the movie. But yeah, I'm just naming it because I was a little uncertain toward the beginning of the podcast season if I should like list it in my notes as a motif. In my notes, when I call something, this is more of an organizational thing. Is like if I decide to deem something a motif, then it's able to be linked to other pages. Okay, I'm getting a little too inside baseball here. It's able to be linked to other pages, but if it's just informal, then it's not something that I link and keep track of. So I have just decided to start linking and keeping track of it. And it's not in Frank Lehman's catalog, so that's why I was kind of like hesitant too. But then I feel like it's like a personal thing that I notice all the time, so I just wanted to keep track of it for myself because, like Frank will tell you himself, it's not like his catalog is the only, if it's not in the catalog, it doesn't exist. That's not the case at all. Yeah, different people spot and care about different types of trends. Okay, 27, the quickies. Okay, no, I'm just gonna, yeah, the quickies, which I did for episodes 2 through 6, they did not last this season. I went in this season thinking I was going to do a short educational segment every episode. That dropped off very quickly. So if you have been tweeting at me like, hey, I don't think I've noticed quickies in a while, you are correct. I stopped doing them after episode 6. It turns out they were very, very time intensive, like to script, to film with B-roll and like time stuff and to put together a succinct video without like all the filler words that I'm putting in now in a long form podcast. Turns out that I don't have time for that. And it was, I tried it and I actually liked, maybe it'll come back again in some form, but in terms of the main podcast, it probably was a little too ambitious because preparing for a normal episode is already a lot of work, just a single episode. And putting the pressure on myself to also, before recording an episode, make sure that I've also produced a short educational segment. Yeah, that's biting biting off more than I could chew. However, if any of them were useful to you, or you liked something in particular, I would love to know, just in case I decide to or am able to revive the concept in the future, or do other kinds of short videos, maybe like as separate videos or something. Let me know. The feedback is helpful. Another thing with the quickies is that sorry, Alex Ludwig doesn't like when I call them that. The light speed lessons, which Connor coined. I was also I didn't do it long enough to ever hit a groove where I knew exactly how to get into production for the next one. And so I think having feedback could perhaps guide me a little bit better in terms of like what questions and topics, because there are so many questions and topics in music that it's, oh my gosh. The quickies. Okay. 28, the Cloud City lightsaber duel. This was a highlight, and Empire Strikes Back is one of my least watched Star Wars movies, especially the end of it. So the amount of times that I have seen this lightsaber duel is probably only in the it's probably like less. It's probably like 100 or less. Or it might even be 50. No, it's definitely more than 50. Compared to how many times I've seen the other movies. The number is just infinite. It is so high that I just don't know how to count it. But my brother and I, as we discussed in his episode, we used to watch The Empire Strikes Back, but like often not go all the way. Like we mainly wanted to watch the Yoda stuff. So now going through it 5 minutes at a time, needless to say, I learned a lot more and picked up on a lot more things. Now, one of the things is like, well, how can you make such a big reveal as telling someone that you are their father when you are their main antagonist? How can you make a big reveal like that feel impactful? And I think the Cloud City lightsaber duel is an incredible example for that. If we go back to the music as a warm blanket concept, there are many parts of this duel that have no music. So no warm blanket. The parts that have no music feel so, I think they feel so like a live wire almost. Feels so like anything could happen. Like don't want to breathe because you just don't want to miss anything. The music's not shuttling you to one emotion or another. It's not helping you comprehend what is going on screen, which I should mention. Back to the music as a warm blanket, the comprehension factor is also really big with music, as music can, when it provides those contextual cues, there's an ease that comes with just understanding how you're supposed to feel about what's on screen, and the music often does that. So when the music is taken away, there's like that guide rail is gone, and there's a lot of that in this Cloud City lightsaber duel. We talked about this in several episodes because this duel spanned several episodes, and if you want to hear about the duel of the, what's it called? The Clash of Lightsabers track. That's Dan Golding's episode in number 22. And I also want to shout out Alex Cunningham on my Discord server wrote an incredible essay. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but if you're on my Discord server, you can read it there in the Star Wars Music Minute research channel. And I'll highlight a couple points from it. So he wrote an incredible essay that's separating the Cloud City lightsaber duel into 3 acts with basically different soundscapes in each of them, and relating each of them to different aspects of fighting tradition. I will not be able to do justice to the whole argument, but he breaks down. He breaks it down into 3 acts. The first being each of them correlating to a different setting. So the first one is the carbon freezing chamber, and there is no music in that, and the sounds are really, like, the sounds of that carbon freezing chamber are really apparent. They're really present, and it's, a lightsaber sound design spotlight moment for sure. And it's really Luke and Vader sizing each other up. Now I'm paraphrasing from what Alex is writing, by the way, so you should read the rest of this essay. And he says, this is a perfect instance of the fake being more real than reality. And what he's talking about is the speed of the lightsaber hums, and you can hear it. And I guess I've kind of jumped into the middle of this argument where he laid out, gave examples of different types of different fighting videos, and was saying, in Foley work or in sound design, the common knowledge is that things are amped up to make them sound real, but to make them sound impactful, but that's not really realistic because people don't actually, in real life, you don't actually hear the same, amped up fighting sounds and grunts and whatever that you hear in real life. But Alex was actually showing evidence of that actually being sometimes what fights can sound like in real life. And I forgot which exact martial, I forgot which of these it was referring to. So sorry, Alex, for definitely butchering what you're saying here. But so the more I talk about this, the more I'm like, oh, I just have to read the essay because I'm not doing it justice. But basically, okay, I'll just cut it short. Carbon freezing chamber, no music. The lower hallway by the window, this is when the music jumps in, the clash of the lightsabers. And this is when it's like very foreboding. This is where in the episode we were talking about it, there was that incisive brass stabs, the dee-dee-dee, dee-dee-dee-dee-dee-dee. It sounds like on guard. But the actual lightsabers themselves, the actual fight itself, is much more seemingly twitchy. And, Alex notes that the stabs in the music don't coincide with the stabs that the characters are making, which is true. And then finally, in the catwalk, the music is, out again. But then this is where we have to set up for the hand being cut off and the father reveal. And going back to the original point that I was making, which was, how do you make a big reveal feel impactful? Well, I think this is how you do it. There's such an arc to this duel where the music is in, it's out. There's like different soundscapes to get used to, different ambiance, different types of fighting effort noise, I guess. The lens of each quote unquote act of the fight or, room, there are new angles, basically. There are distinct angles to this fight. And the fact that it goes, it dips down and we're not so overstimulated with with constant music, constant, all of the sound firing on all cylinders, because it's so, I guess, deftly woven in. Like, okay, let's take this analogy back. Okay, I have a mixing board here. Okay, I have a mixing board here. I'm showing it on screen. And each of these, faders, they're called slider thingies, turns up the knob on like a new thing. So a different thing. So like this track right here, I'm not going to touch it. This one right here is for the microphone I'm talking about. This one right here is for this piano. This one right here, I have my violin plugged in. These other ones could be for anything. So if the music is on its own track, if the lightsaber's on another track, if the sounds of the like, and the grunts and whatever are on another track, and then there's like the sounds of the room or is like on another track. Like you have all these sounds on different tracks. What I'm saying is that it's not like the volume on all of them is not turned up at the same time. Rather, each phase of the fight it does like a different recipe, does different ratios of each thing. It kind of gives us a different glimpse. And visually, these things happen too, just like the different angles, the different shots, the different, like the scope and everything. So the music is down before we get the hand cut off. And then when the hand gets cut off, the music is up. Now, it's not literally like sliders that they're working with. I'm just talking about selectively holding things back in order to let other things shine or be more noticeable, and then being able to kind of to tinker with all of those relative levels, so to speak. Okay, that's all I meant by that. Okay, so the Cloud City lightsaber duel is a true highlight, definitely. Okay, number 29, R2-D2. So R2-D2 is great. And in the last episode, Justin Leo Kennedy came on and did a whole R2. We had a whole R2 sound design extravaganza. And he reversed engineered R2 sound using an ARP 2600 virtual emulator, like a plugin. I'll put a link to the plug. If you go back to that episode, all the info is in the show notes of that. And okay, I have a few things to say about R2. One of them is that I don't take R2-D2's sound for granted, although it's anymore. It's okay. It's easy to take R2-D2's sound for granted just because that's the first droid that I knew of and 3PO ever in life. So that's the baseline for what robots in movies sound like. It's R2 and 3PO. Little did I know that that's like actually R2 is a very stellar like bar to set your droid expectations at. Now, I had the good fortune, I had an opportunity last week, and including, and a few listeners went and other people in LA went. Basically, Ben Burt, there was a free event in LA last weekend, Ben Burt in Conversation, because he had done this film, this like exhibit for the Academy Museum of the Motion Picture. So he had I still can't believe this happened. So I actually got to see Ben Burt last week, which I never thought would happen ever. And he talked about his work, and it was so amazing. It was like even better than I would have expected. Like he was so giving with his explanations and the stories and the photos. Like they showed footage. Okay, wait, I'm gushing about Ben Burt. Okay. But he talked about R2 for a little bit. And I want to share something that he said. He actually made like a little short film to explain this, because I could tell that this explanation was probably important to him and that he wanted to convey it in a way that made sense. So Ben Burt, apart from Star Wars, has also worked on many other films and made other robot sounds, including WALL-E. And he said that a common thing that like his clients would always ask him was to make something that sounds as good as R2, make something that hits all of those emotions, happy, sad, frustrated, silly, like give it the same emotional abilities as R2, as cute as R2, just make it as good as R2, but make it sound completely different. So don't make it sound anything like R2, but do the same things that R2 achieves, but don't sound like R2. And he said, like, gosh, like he felt that he feels that he really put it all in R2. Like R2 is like R2 has it all. There's kind of nothing he can really pull that isn't already in R2. But he would try to make things that sounded different because that's what the clients requested. And anytime that he would put in what he considered to be like an element of R2, where he was, well, the client said nothing kind of like R2, but I don't know, I'll throw in something similar to R2. Whenever he did that, the client would say, yes, more of that. So basically, people want something different from R2, but at the end of the day, they kind of don't. They kind of just want R2. They kind of just want R2. And you know what? We got R2. And by we, I mean Star Wars. R2 is just amazing. And the quality of the emotional capability of that droid, I think, is what sets him apart from many other droids, even since then, but definitely up until then, is that R2 sounds not just like a robot, but like an emotive creature that we feel things for. So it was wonderful to hear Ben Burt discuss that. Also, the R2 demonstration that Justin did inspired an R2 challenge coined by Dominic Sewell. And Dominic actually was inspired to do an R2 experiment of himself. And so I, put it out there if people wanted to try to make R2 sound. And so I'm going to play an entry by Dominic, and then I'm going to play a couple by Jeremy Sarek. Okay, this is what Dominic made, and I'll put a link in the show notes to, where it's being hosted on SoundCloud. But he said it's called Droid Experiment Not Using a Ring Modulator. And then his description says, I had fun using voice input as a sidechain to control two VCOs to mimic R2 type sounds. So let's hear it. That's awesome. Let's hear it again. Yay. Sorry for that random music playing. It's very annoying how SoundCloud doesn't let you just stop. It just continues on with recommended. Okay. Anyway, however, I did like what it played next. It just wasn't relevant. Okay. So now I'm going to play Jeremy's 2 attempts. So Jeremy Sarek made 2 attempts. The first was based on Justin's and followed what Justin did in the video in the episode. And let's see, I'll play that. Probably turn it up a little bit. And then the second attempt that he made was based on the book Patch and Tweak and used a Korg synth. I don't have the book in here anymore, but I showed the book in the last episode. So this is an attempt not following the tutorial, kind of doing it himself. That's cool. They're both very different attempts, but something they all have in common, all 3 of these, is that there's that like dynamic, there's that pitch, big pitch fluctuation, which is like very, very R2. Okay. Oh, we're on number 30. Oh my gosh, number 30. Doing Empire Strikes Back along with Dominic Sewell. That was a highlight. So Dom, if you're listening, for those who don't know, Dom on his channel, Dominic Sewell Music, has also been going along Empire Strikes Back, analyzing it, at basically the same pace that I have, and it's been really cool to have someone else going through the movie at the same time from a different lens. You have to check out Dominic's channel. The analysis is cue by cue, and it's just amazingly in depth musically, and yeah, it's been really fun. So yeah, thanks, Dom. I appreciated this. All right, now let's move on to listener questions. Okay, there are many. Okay, one is from Alex Cunningham. What new tools, techniques, approaches, or critical lenses did you, as the host and creator, encounter this season? To what extent do you expect you'll utilize them in future seasons? There are so many answers to this. I can't really say them all, but one of them is like in Dennis Ham's episode, episode 8. He has this whole approach of mapping intervals to emotions and considering like so we went through that interval test in that episode, and kind of talked about the common emotions that come up for different intervals, like major second, minor third, and then which it itself was one thing, but the step further that he takes it was new for me, which is like a minor triad, for example. I tend to think of that as one thing. Like people will talk about how this triad makes them feel, but he goes a step further and separates it into like, well, minor third makes you feel, is associated with this feeling. Perfect fifth is associated with another feeling. So I guess he's like adding intervals, and he's a jazzer. So he's a jazz pianist. So he is making chords all the time that are like, sorry, I'm besmirching jazz musicians' names by just not looking at the keys and just playing random notes. So his framework kind of, he feels, stuff like, come on, play a jazz chord. I don't know. Like he'll feel something as like kind of the sum of like different intervals, which is super fascinating. So another one is, I paid more attention to pitch class sets this season, thanks to Dom. This isn't particularly new, but sort of like the filigree thing, how it was something that I felt all along but didn't have a name for. The idea of light motivic, like fragments, motivic particles, was something that was helpful to hear named by Frank Lehman. I've long been unsure how to refer to like when just a part of a motif is used somewhere where it's not like a leitmotif instance, but there's like a quality about it that is transferred over to another use. And Frank, what Frank calls it is perfect. It's these leitmotivic particles. So it's things like, how the Imperial March has so many different, parts that fit together like a puzzle. And you don't need you don't need the theme to evoke the march. One of the particles is just the rhythm. One of the particles is the harmony, there are other aspects of it of certain themes that you can extract and use somewhere else and still evoke the main thing without being like, oh, this is definitely the Imperial March. Another one is just the language of horror is like a lens that I'm thinking of more. Also, there is like, oh gosh, a ton of David Huron stuff. Also from Dennis, the acoustic theological model, I think. There are a lot of things that are things that to what extent do you expect you'll utilize them in future seasons? None of them are written off as like definitely won't utilize. All of them are on the table for might utilize, including the one that you offered, Alex, which was all your analysis of the fight on Cloud City. many things. The answer to this question would be too long, so I'll think about this more, and perhaps it'll come up in more detail in the future. But just for the purpose of time, I will continue. Chris Malone asked, do you think the Death Star and or Imperial troops motifs could or should have returned for Empire Strikes Back? I'd not want a universe where the Imperial March didn't exist. However, I wonder if the Death Star motif, for example, could have supported transitions back to the Imperial fleet. So I personally didn't miss the Imperial troops motif. But that might be because I'm just used to it being in A New Hope. Now, I really like the motif, but I feel that in this movie, I don't think stormtroopers are as present as a plot affecting. I think the stormtroopers have a much reduced presence in this film. And I don't mean that they don't exist. We see a ton of them on screen, like snowtroopers and everything. We see a ton of them on screen, but they don't provide the same narrative value as they do in A New Hope when they are, first introduced. So they're new. So that's a whole thing. And then there's also like the whole thing in A New Hope where Chewie hits them and they steal their costumes for a bit, their outfits, their uniforms, their armor. And then there's also like Obi-Wan doing the Jedi mind trick on them. Move along, move along. Like, I think they are much more of like extras in Empire Strikes Back. Now, I will consider this question again when we get to Return of the Jedi, because I think in Return of the Jedi, they come back more again. Yeah. In terms of the Death Star motif type of thing, well, besides the obvious that there's no Death Star in this movie, I would say that like I felt the presence of the Death Star motif or something similar to it. And this goes back to the leitmotivic fragment or particles thing, where at least like the chord, like I will say that the chord, at least one of the chord progressions for the Death Star motif is like the reverse of the Imperial March. Yeah. So personally, I didn't miss the Imperial troops, but it wouldn't have bothered me if it was in there. You know what I mean? It's hard to say because I think I don't have very many critical notes for this score where like, John Williams definitely should have done this or that. If anything, I wish the droids motif showed up more in future films. Okay. Ken Plume's question is not a question, but he requests more Muppets. And so that's why I have Yoda here. So, yeah. So Alex asks, the critical consensus remains, though it's changing, that Empire Strikes Back is the best Star Wars film. Is it the best sounding Star Wars film? I would say that the critical consensus probably says yes, but I don't know. I don't know. I think perhaps yes, but recency bias, and I just went through it 5 minutes at a time for 6 months. So recency bias is very strong here with me. But I guess I would like to actually throw this question out to listeners. So thank you, Alex, for letting me use that question as just to be a springboard. And then Jeremy Sarek asks, how did the writing change from A New Hope to Empire Strikes Back? How did John Williams' style or approach change? What surprised you the most about the writing in Empire Strikes Back compared to A New Hope? I would say that the writing in Empire Strikes Back it feels less I'm tempted to say it feels less obvious what it's being temp-tracked as, but I think I'm just I can't say that genuinely because I don't know all of the music in the world, and other people, I never would have picked up that the Emperor scene was temp tracked with Bartok. So it could just be that I don't know the pieces as well. And so it's just a personal thing in my perception. But I would say that still, I would say that it leans more into romance and horror. I think something that strikes me about this score is how many idioms it takes from. I'm slow to answer this because as I'm about to say things, I keep thinking of many other instances where John Williams does this sort of thing. But I feel like this score, like, is virtuosic in, like, we have like almost spectralist type things at the beginning. We have with that very wispy, like atonal adjacent Hoth music. We have like this very, we have that Walton, very British sounding music. We have the Imperial March. We have this like love theme. We have that horror stuff that sounds like Hitchcock. That sounds like Bernard Herrmann. That sounds like Bartok. We have the initial Cloud City music, which is like, sounds sort of like Sibelius violin concerto, but also I'm just going to say it kind of sounds like it takes from Middle East tropes and stuff like that. We have synth. We have the synthesizer used a ton. We have our first use of vocals also in Cloud City. Like I think this score takes it goes a step further in its experimentation and in the breadth of things it draws from and includes. I mean, just thinking back to the Battle of Hoth, just like kind of the really bold choices, like the two pianos for the lumbering AT-ATs. And yeah, I feel like it takes things up a notch and perhaps draws from more styles. Yeah, I think, and the thing that surprised me most about The Empire Strikes Back would probably have to be the synth thing, just since that was totally went over my head. Oh, I forgot to even mention Magic Tree, which is like a totally unique, striking cue. Yeah. Okay, I'll just do a couple more questions so this doesn't last forever. But Alex asks, what kinds of guests and or voices do you want on future seasons of the show? Are there professions or perspectives you'd love to have weigh in on the sound of Star Wars? Yes. I'd really love to talk to people who were involved in the music or sound departments of any of these films. So like supervising, like sound editors, score recordists, sound designers, re-recording mixers, things like that. The Rise of Skywalker season is next, so I'm just going to put a little bit of a wish list out there. First of all, I also am always interested in talking to musicians. That is the category of all the people that are like personnel on the film. That's the category of people I feel most comfortable reaching out to, just because that's my personal realm of experience and where I'm more likely to have like a mutual friend or like a mutual colleague. And so I feel that's like, it's still hard for me to reach out to people I don't know, but it's slightly less daunting to reach out to fellow musicians. So I'm going to be doing that, but sound editors, so like supervising sound editors, Matthew Wood, David Accord. Obviously Ben Burt would be amazing, but re-recording mixers like Chris Scarabozio, Andy Nelson, supervising music editor, Ramiro Belgart. I would really like to talk to editors. Like, because so many of the questions I have are not only like how the music was written and how that goes, but the decision making and the negotiation and the balance between the music and sound, and just like how the sound is done. Like that's sort of something where I feel like there's not as much information online, and there are so many like sound credits that it's hard to know exactly what everyone does. And I want to have a better appreciation for the unique role and like all the different tasks that are involved in putting together music and sound for the films. So I'd like to talk to music librarians. There's Mark Graham, music editors. These are, for example, Alex Levy. I'd also like to talk to Grant Gershon, who conducted the LA Master Chorale, who, is the conductor for the LA Master Chorale, music director, is that what it's called? Because they sang on the Rise of Skywalker soundtrack. Would like to talk to the Foley artists, Ronnie Brown and Margie O'Malley. Anyway, I would like to talk to people who worked on music and sound in these films. I'd also like to I'd love to talk to a conductor who has conducted a Star Wars score live to picture, which I don't think is relevant for Rise of Skywalker. I don't know if they actually do those live to picture concerts yet, but maybe Return of the Jedi or Phantom Menace. I would like to know I think it would be an interesting perspective. I'd also like to talk to people who are just like analytical and expressive and able to like bring their own lens to the show, provide analysis or insight that challenges me. So this includes, music theorists, musicologists, music critics, musicians, especially of instruments that I don't play, people who are involved in the industry that, can tell me more about those areas that I mentioned above, where I'm not exactly sure how it's done, how some decisions are made. I'd like to also talk to, there are a lot of David W. Collins would be an amazing guest, a host of the soundtrack show. But to be honest, also a lot of the guests that have been on my dream list have already been guests on the show. So I'm very lucky in that respect. Like, yeah, some of my like top dream guests are fortunately have already been on the show. So that's really nice too. So yeah. I think one more question. Yes, Justin Leo Kennedy. Would love to know more about your arrangement approach for the Asteroid Belt Chase track that you made. Not sure if you already covered that, but I'm wondering how you went about tackling such a dense queue. Okay. Okay. Is this the moment where I'm going to finally play the whole thing from start to finish? I will do it. Okay. So this is the Asteroid Field cover that's in this podcast. So I made a piano and violin arrangement. I will explain it after we listen. so that's it. Okay. So I will talk about the arrangement. First of all, whenever I make the first step is, if you've been listening to this podcast for last season and this season, you know that I like to start with a kind of a cold, like an open, before I do the big intro. So I like to say, like, this episode is about minutes 1 through 5 of The Empire Strikes Back. And then I like to have the music come in, kind of full speed or full volume. And then I like to come in like, hello there, and welcome to Star Wars Music Minute. So then it ducks down again. And then at the end of the podcast, I like to have music that fades in and ends on a button ending. So that's the first thing I think about when I'm like, a new season is upon me and I'm like, I need to make music. How am I going to arrange this? First, I think specifically about the context that it needs to fit into. So the thing I need for that is I need a soft start and a hard end, because when I start the intro, I'm never sure exactly how many seconds I'm going to take to say, this episode is about minutes 6 through 10. Sometimes it takes like a little bit longer, especially if there's like 2 guests and it takes a little longer to say their names or whatever. So I need something where it can creep in at the beginning. However, I need something that also has a striking start. So I guess I want it to have a soft ending, a second more defined entrance. I want it to have a soft beginning, a second more defined entrance, and then a button ending. Let me put on screen and then at the end it needs to have a hit point on the way out. So here's an example of like the way that I have communicated this to Nick Norton, who is the amazing editor of this podcast. Like, I have marked in my sheet music, and he's a musician too, so I knew that he could read this. Like, I have marked in my music where I want the music to come up, and then like what part, you can see in orange the part that I have circled here. That's the part that you hear at the end of my episodes. And that was for a reason. Okay, so the point of that is, first, I'm specific about like the mood that I want to, like, I want to set a mood, and then I want to end with a mood. And I want it to end on an up note. Not necessarily a happy note, but like a high energy note. So a button ending is, when something has a defined ending as opposed to a fade out. And I don't want a fade out at the end. I did the same thing for solo season, where if I play, this was the solo season cover. That's that opening. Okay. So you can see for solo season, it was kind of a similar type of opening where it fades in, because I'm saying this episode is about minutes 1 through 5 of whatever. And then that's where I stop talking. And this is where I could go, hello there, and welcome to Star Wars Music Minute, and it can fade out. And then if we go to the end of that track, which I don't think I ever played an entire. So, okay. I'll do this for Asteroid Field in a second, but I want it to, when I'm doing the outro, I want it to fade in and have a part where then it's like, get excited, because now we're going to hear the ending. And that's usually when I am saying, thanks for listening to Star Wars Music Minute. And I tell my editor specifically, this part coincides with when I say, like, line it up here, so that when I say, thanks for listening to Star Wars Music Minute, then the next thing is a strong hit point. So for solo season, it was, thanks for listening to Star Wars Music Minute. And then this was on its own. High energy ending. A button ending instead of a fade out. So now if we go to, the same formula is in my Asteroid Field arrangement, where at the beginning you're going to hear a similar type of fade in. Or it's not going to be a fade in, but it's going to be something very simple that can easily be looped if need be. So This episode is about minutes 6 through 10 of The Empire Strikes Back with whatever. And that's the hit, where I stop talking. And that's the first impression that I wanted to make. So, hello there, and welcome to Star Wars Music Minute, where we listen to where we do whatever. And then that can just fade out as we do the intro. Now, unfortunately, because I made such a long track, you don't even hear most of it. But except just now. And then in the ending, you're going to hear the same thing where it kind of, by the end, it kind of goes back up, and there's a definite point where it's like crescendos to a climax, a brief break, and then another hit and a button ending. So. Thanks for listening to Star. I got so distracted that I didn't even do it. Holy crap. Okay. I put sheet music up on screen. Okay. We're now at the part where it's circled in blue. So this is where I'm saying, thanks for listening to Star Wars Music Minute. And now it's out. Now this part is designed to have no more talking over it. See a button ending, you know when it's the end. That's just a personal thing. I don't like fade outs. I think I like people to know when it's over and for it to be obvious. Okay, so that is the overarching principles that no matter it's the box that I have to fit my arrangement into. It has to fit within those parameters, if that makes sense. So now in terms of actually doing the arrangement, okay, this was quite a journey. It was quite a journey. The Asteroid Field is a very tense cue, and it actually ends in a way that is not a button ending. It actually ends by trickling into Han and Leia's theme, and then So I had to make some decisions about. First, I had to make decisions about how I was going to get out of the main theme. Like I knew I wanted to open with the thing, and I knew that I wanted to end with the, main Asteroid Field theme. Now, if you're my patron and you were at Woodshed Wednesdays, for weeks, I was trying to figure out how to do this arrangement. I was going through different possibilities of chord progressions. Like I was thinking maybe I'll only do this thing once. But then I wasn't happy with it. Let me play you an early example of just a chord idea that I had that I didn't end up going with. It's like, I lied. That's exactly what I went with. There was like another one that there were other versions, trust me, where the chord progression was different. Just take my word for it. And the reason is because the two times this theme comes up in the actual track, the chord progression is actually different. It starts out the same, but it ends up differently, and there are pros and cons to each chord progression. And so I was thinking of either mixing the two chord progressions up. I ended up doing both of them, but now it's a super long track. And by long, I mean like 2 minutes. What else do I have to say about that? Okay. Unlike my previous arrangements where it was just as many instruments as I wanted to do, I specifically wanted to do this arrangement in the style of Fritz Kreisler, who is this Austrian, he was this violinist, composer who did a lot of music that I played growing up. He's a very famous violinist, composer, and his style, like his Viennese style and like his flashy violin recital type of thing. Like when you think of Fritz Kreisler, if you're a violinist, you think piano violin recital music, you know, you're thinking like, things like Preludium and Allegro. And in this arrangement, so I was already limited by I wanted the arrangement to work for piano and violin, solo piano, one piano, one violin. It's meant to be. It's like a recital piece, like a violin recital piece. That's why there's no like string layering or anything to fall back onto. I wanted it all to be able to be played on a solo instrument. So having that limitation in place actually helped me enter this and helped me make decisions, especially about the chords that I was going to use. Because on a single instrument, you have to be much more careful about the register of things that you're playing, because the register, the notes that you're playing, it really depends on the key. It depends on the specific notes. It depends on the way that one note moves to the other note. There are just certain technical limitations to the violin, to any instrument, that you just have to try a passage out and hear if it resonates better, if it is more punchy in one way or another. All of that is to say that helped guide the some of the choices I made in this arrangement. So I'm going to put like a page on screen of the last page of this. This is an example of like the last page of the violin music that I made of this arrangement. Actually, I should put up a bigger portion. It's two pages for the violin part, multiple pages for the piano part. And I recorded the piano part first so that I could have the tempo in set. So, okay, you'll see at rehearsal letter D is the first time this asteroid field motif comes in. Okay. But that's not the one you hear when you're listening to the podcast. The one you hear is the one that comes in at F. So all of this stuff, like I wanted it to end with double stops. I wanted to end in that flashy Fritz Kreisler style, that flashy Fritz Kreisler violin recital style. Sorry, my violin's very out of tune, but like there's like Easter eggs for Fritz Kreisler throughout this, basically. And if you are a violinist and you're familiar with Fritz Kreisler, you've probably already noticed like 5. I'll actually lead into it. What are my notes? That's actually a nod to Ravel. What are the notes? That chord, that double stop, I don't know what it's called. It's so like solo violinist, and I wanted this to sound like a violin show tune, basically. So I knew I wanted to end with that, which meant that when the asteroid field part comes in earlier, that I wanted to save the double stops by having it just be voiced by, one note at a time. So for that, the elements that I included were more like stylistic things, like sliding around a lot. Here I did this is a very typical Kreisler romantic violin type of slide where you chromatically hit the chromatic notes on the way down. So. then a very indulgent slide. You know? I wanted a chance to like totally violin out, and I did. It's not a terribly easy piece that I made, but yes, that's a little bit of the thought process behind the style of it. Let me screenshot the first page. You're looking at my really, this score looks really terrible because I made it for myself, so it's, it's not it's not set nicely or anything like that. Let's see. Forgot to mention, a big part of this was after I made the arrangement and recorded the piano part. This whole thing took weeks, so it's not like I just did this overnight. This was actually extremely it took a lot of work. I made myself a sort of a track to practice to, and so just a piano backing track. Etc. Whatever the notes are. So one nice thing about having the limitation of piano and violin is that I knew that I couldn't include every voice. That was actually really freeing. I didn't feel pressured to include every little interstitial. Etc. Okay, so for that part, I knew that I wanted that to be in unison. Just sometimes when I'm arranging, sometimes I just have like ideas and I just want to do those ideas and then I do those ideas. Wow, that was an extremely unhelpful explanation, wasn't it? Honestly, it just all comes from my experience playing in many violin recitals and playing many violin showpieces. These are just like gestures that happen in a lot of them, where it's like the piano and violin will coordinate on like a run together and then break out into something different. So yeah, I honestly, I was just working in a style that I think is fun to play and thought would be fun to do in kind of this virtuosic violin style for a piece like the Asteroid Field, which is so all over the place. You're never going to catch all the notes. I caught barely a fraction of the notes. But I think having it in like its defined own style made that satisfactory to me, because then I could throw in things like violinisms and do things like pizzicato, which is another thing that will happen in violin pieces. So yeah, that part right there. There's the indulgent slide. Just lots of slides. Indulgent slides. It's like my favorite genre of music. It's a violin recital piece. That's what it is. that's straight inspiration from Ravel Zigan. POV, you're at your violin recital, you want to have a nice encore. This is what this is. Yeah, so that's what that is. I would love to re-record it now that I have a mixer that actually works. Recording it was a nightmare, and I'm not actually happy with how it sounds recording-wise. That's why I'm not going to release this track. If you're a patron, though, I'll share the. If you're a patron, I will. That'll be the only way to get this track at the moment, because it's not ready. I'm not going to release it straight up. I'm not going to release it. I would need to re-record it, but. If you are listening to this podcast and you actually would be interested in the sheet music for it, now I have not typeset it. I have not. It's not ready to be sold as sheet music, but I guess it would be helpful to know if there is interest. It'll help me if I decide to do it in the future, but no promises. All right. So only one more thing left. Now, about to wrap this episode up. I just have to. Do something very important, which is, in exactly 3 words, what does Star Wars sound like, according to all the guests this season? Droids, hopeful, dramatic. Unproblematic, intergalactic, Wagner. Adventure, nostalgia, romance. Thematic, intense, lush. Transporting, transforming, transcendental. Vivid, symphonic storytelling. Adventure, mysticism, justice. Texture, motion, thematic. Longing, grace, adventure. My lifelong obsession. Triumph, threat, enchantment. Colorful, roller coaster, crosstalk. Expansive, romantic, foreignly familiar. Expansive, real horizons. Past, present, future. Space, brass, droids. Stories and sound. Classic, modern, nostalgic. Narrative. Pew, vroom. Rrr. Pneumatic machinery sounds. Imperial walker clanking. Sweeping sentimental heroic. Elegant musical storytelling. Tragedy, adventure, wisdom. R2-D2 beeping sounds. Simply the best. Thematic orchestral richness. And then I'll add mine. Filigree, fanfares, and flow. So there you have it. I shall answer the rest of the Star Wars Music Minute questionnaire now for myself. So in 3 words, what does Star Wars sound like? My answer was filigree, fanfares, and flow. What's something related to Star Wars music or sound that I want to learn more about? I would like to know, is there an internal sonic style guide at Lucasfilm or Skywalker Sound that is specific to Star Wars? And I mean things like relative loudness of music and dialogue, if there's a specific protocol for miking or like looping in alien sounds, etc. And I would be especially curious if there's anything in the Star Wars like music/sound style guide that goes against current industry norms and is like a specific thing inherent to Star Wars that is like intentionally, intentionally discussed and, done to keep the Star Wars sound. That's what I would like to know. I would like to know what Lucasfilm and Skywalker Sound thinks is the Star Wars sound and what they try to do about it. Last but not least, what is a score or soundtrack that you're fond of besides anything Star Wars? And I will say E.T. by John Williams. Yeah, why not? It's absolutely one of my favorite scores. So yeah, I'm in good company with that. I know that's hardly a unique answer, but it's never a bad answer. The last thing I need to do is thank people. First of all, I need to thank all of the guests this season. Oh my gosh, I cannot. I'm so lucky. The guests this season really brought your A game. You challenged me and taught me so much and had such good conversations with me. Just big thank you to all the guests, really, for making this season awesome. At least awesome for me. I have to thank my editor, Nick Norton, who, has had to deal with my problematic mixer for most of this season. bless your patience, Nick. Bless your patience. I'm glad that now I have something that works a little bit better. Yeah, big help. I also have to thank Frank Lehman for the complete catalog of the musical themes of Star Wars. I have to thank Dominic Sewell for going through Empire Strikes Back with me. We had, several Zoom calls just to chat about stuff. Yeah, it's been really fun going through this with you, and I'm glad that now we have met virtually and know each other better and can do more stuff in the future. I also have to thank Pete and Alex from Star Wars Minute, who of course are the godfathers of the show, who inspired the whole movies by minute format. I have to thank my listeners who have been very engaged, left awesome comments and reviews, and asked great questions, sent great emails. I appreciate you. And most of all, I have to thank my patrons, because making a podcast like this is incredibly time intensive. I don't know if it's easy to tell that, but I'm also a slow worker. But anyway, it's incredibly time intensive and it's not cheap whatsoever. I still have a goal of breaking even, but this is a labor of love, and I absolutely love doing this, and I would not be able to do it were it not for my patrons. Yeah, you mean so much to me. And if you, listener, want to support the show and join a super awesome Discord server while you're at it, I'll put a link in the description, show notes, to how to become a patron. The main perk is getting to join the Discord server, which is where many of my questions are sourced from, and most of these discussions take place. Another perk is weekly private live streams, just for patrons. But I'll put all the info in the show notes. I appreciate any support, any encouragement, any Apple Podcast reviews, whatever all those things are. And really just thank you for your passion and listenership and, overall support and even help. Sometimes people send me, helpful articles or resources, and that helps me greatly in my research. With that, I hope you stay tuned for next season. It's The Rise of Skywalker. The season after that will be Return of the Jedi. And then I'll announce what comes after that. But I hope you stay tuned for next season. It's starting very shortly, and it is John Williams' final score for the Star Wars movies. So it will be momentous in a completely different way than Empire Strikes Back has been momentous. All right. All of my gratitude. Thank you so much for listening to The Empire Strikes Back 5 minutes at a time with me over the past 6-7 months. May the Force be with you, and I'll talk to you very soon. Oh, I will talk to you next week, because this is not the final episode of the season. What am I talking about? Come back next week for the Chris Malone episode. Okay, I'll shut up now. May the Force be with you. Thanks for listening to Star Wars Music Minute.